World Singers! My name is Brooke.
And I'm Tyler.
And these are
Cosmere
Conversations.
Episode 10. We have done it, Brooke. 10 episodes.
We're here!
Yes.
10! The perfect number 10.
Thank you all so much for tuning back in. And let's get right into it. We have been going through the different magic systems that exist in the Cosmere. We did Rashar, we did Scadrial, and we are rounding out our kind of first 10 episodes with magic on Cell and Nalthis. Combining the two, hoping to keep it short because these magic systems are less developed than those other ones.
Yeah, primarily we only have standalone books on both of these worlds rather than full series like we do on Scadrial and Rashar. So these are going to be together, and then after this, I think we're going right into Oathbringer, yeah?
That is exactly what we're going to do
Which
next.
is really what we want to be doing. We're just like trying to hold off to let everyone finish the book.
And maybe get
so
like
here we
more
are in the
reread.
meantime.
Yeah, exactly. So we're on Cell and Nalthis today, looking at the magic systems. Let's begin with the planet of Cell.
Yeah,
Brooke,
let's dive right in.
what book takes place on the planet of Cell?
Cell, we primarily have Elantris is the big one, and then we have a couple of novellas or short stories also on Cell, which would be, I think it's called The Hope of Elantris.
Yes.
A little sort of sequel-y, prequel-y thing.
Yes.
And The Emperor's Soul, which is a short story. One of the first things that I read by Brandon Sanderson. I think the first thing you read.
Yes.
And as I have been reading my way through these books, I think that little short story has become more and more significant. And I've come to realize that little short story is packed full of quite a lot of important information. So I'm excited to go into some of that today.
Absolutely. And I think that Elantris was the first book that Brandon published. That is his, well, he might have done something, short stories, but in the Cosmere universe, Elantris is the first book that was written. Not necessarily the first book that I would suggest starting with, but it is absolutely an interesting magic system to look at.
Yeah, the magic system on Cell is highly focused on form and the idea of specific shapes tying in with language as well, which as a language nerd, I find this idea or this system super interesting. So let's just kind of start with the shards on the planet. There were 2 shards on Cell. They are currently both shattered, and those are Dominion and Devotion, which were held by the vessels Aeona and Sky.
Now, we know that the shattering of both Dominion and Devotion happened before the events in the book Elantris.
Yeah, I think it's quite far back in the prehistory. I believe there were humans, but it's like in the Dark Ages.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is also directly tied into Odium specifically.
Oh, yeah.
This
100%.
This is like the first victory of Odium. There may have been some other stuff, but certainly his first like major shattering of shards was on the planet Cell before he went to the Rasharian system.
Yes, correct. Yeah, this was before he shattered Honor.
Okay, so now that we've kind of set the stage, we have the shattering of these 2 shards.
And something interesting happened when those shards shattered, typically most of a shard's power is housed in the spiritual realm. For some reason, when the shattering happened of dominion and devotion, that power coalesced in the cognitive realm, which is very idiosyncratic, creates some incredibly specific and individual circumstances on Cell.
Yeah, magic there acts differently, obviously still connected through the three realms, but it's going to act and behave differently than we see on other planets throughout the Cosmere because of the events of the Shattering. And we don't know really anything about the events of the Shattering. It's not like either Honor on Rashard or even the events of Preservation and Ruin.
We really know nothing.
Yeah. So the only kind of theory that I want to toss out there in regards to the Shattering before we just talk about the magic system specifically is that I have a theory that the coalescing in the cognitive realm, as you called it, was a protective measure that Dominion and Devotion, almost like a loophole that Preservation tries to use against Ruin as well. I give up some of my power and become weaker in the long term against Ruin, but I might accomplish creating humanity, which benefits me in the long term as well.
Right.
I think the shards might have been attacked by Odium, and in that process said, hey, he's gonna beat us if we just stay as normal, but if we give up maybe our access to the spiritual realm and shift all of our power into the cognitive realm, it might be a way to stay intact and survive this attack of Odium. That's just my theory right now.
Yeah, totally possible. If they were able to somehow stay more powerful by sort of keeping all of their power concentrated together in one realm or something like that.
Because, Brooke, can you give us some of the quotes that we pull from Chris in Arcanum Unbounded? When she's talking about the Cellish system, she is going to really point out how this cognitive realm interacts. And what it creates.
Yeah, that little part has some gold. Let's dive right in here. Quote, because the cognitive realm has distinct locations, unlike the spiritual realm, where most forms of investiture reside, magic on Cell is very dependent upon physical position. In addition, the rules of perception and intent are greatly magnified on Cell, to the point that language or similar functions directly shapes the magic as it is pulled from the cognitive realm and put to use. End quote.
Right there, we have things going on that we have never really talked about or seen before. So, language or similar functions. Now, what is the... We're going to talk about this in more detail, but what's the language that they're talking about here?
Well, it depends on where you are on Cell, because it's dependent upon what language you speak.
Absolutely. Sorry.
And I think what it's sort of saying as similar functions is speaking to written language, not just spoken language. Sorry. So, for example, in Erelon, you have, they write with the Aeons, which are sort of like Asian type characters that they use to write with, as opposed to a letter like we would use in a Roman alphabet. Yeah. Which they use to create magic.
And that system of the Aeons, or the Aeon Door, as it's called, that full magic system, is going to be pulling from the cognitive realm through the shape, this symbol.
Yeah, so I think that goes back to the whole basis of magic on Cell and that idea of being focused on form. The shapes that we'll see as we go through all of these different magic systems are what enables almost like a hole to be made in between the physical realm and the cognitive realm that allows that power to escape. And something else that Chris says in her little essay at the beginning of that part of Arcanum Unbounded speaks to the pressure that's sort of felt in the cognitive realm because those two shards' power are trapped there, that it creates a pressure scenario where, like, and they on well, in Erelon anyway, they call it the door, that power base, that well of power, they call it the door, and they say that they can even feel like it's trying to get out.
Yeah, it's chaotic and dangerous. It is described as a risky cognitive realm, as we've talked about before, through Shadesmar or through the kind of mist cognitive realm of Scadrial. It's possible to travel, and many characters can do it relatively unscathed, but on Cell, because you have the full power of the shards trapped in the cognitive realm, it's violent almost.
Yeah, Chris has said that it's very difficult and dangerous and like inadvisable.
Yeah, and so like where on Rashar we kind of see Shadesmar as this ocean made out of beads, I almost kind of imagine the cognitive realm on Cell as being like an ocean in a storm or a hurricane, because in Rashar it's always described as just like an infinitely flat plane, but it's just made up of these beads that you can kind of like sink into that represent physical objects. And on Cell I just kind of imagine it like chaos and just everything is kind of smashing around. One of the things that this leads to, and that Chris remarks on in Arcanum Unbounded, she says, quote, "Indeed, I believe that the very landscape itself has become invested to the point that it has a growing self-awareness in a way unseen on other planets in the Cosmere."
That is like the most fascinating sentence, I think.
We have a planet on Cell that is becoming self-aware.
Well, Cell is the planet. She was saying like...
excuse me, that's what I meant. I mean, the planet of Cell is becoming self-aware.
Yeah. Oh my... Like, literally, the Earth, the planet that you live on, is animating... What? Oh my gosh.
I mean, the idea in human mythology of, like, Mother Earth, Gaia, and kind of giving a personification to Earth itself is always kind of seen in our mythologies. Here on Cell, it's a key aspect of this investiture and this process of what happened with the Shattering, where what I think happened is that the spiritual realm was attacked, Dominion and Devotion, in my opinion, somehow escaped yet trapped themselves in the cognitive realm. And because the cognitive realm is closer to the physical realm, that power started to connect to the physical realm more than it is on other planets.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think also because, like Chris says, the cognitive realm actually has physical places. So, you know, if you think about it like us here in America, we have a specific way that we think about our country. That's going to affect how America would appear in the cognitive realm. So you have that happening on Cell with different people in their different countries, right? Thinking about their own country. And that is sort of infusing that power into the very place that they are living.
And for the story of Elantris, it takes place in the country or the kingdom of Erelon, right? And the country of Erelon and the people of Erelon use a writing system called the Aeon.
Yeah, we're going to see all across Cell, we did say language, but then also the place and the shape of the place that you live becomes very important to your magic system. So you have the Aeonic peoples, who are the people from Erelon. You know, just in their day-to-day life, they're using the Aeons. And they come to find out in the story of Elantris that those Aeons, when used in a specific way by specific people, can allow them to access the door, which they call Aeon Door.
Yes, so door equals magic door is investiture, specifically connected to the people of Erelon and their writing system.
Yeah, not all the people of Erelon.
Sorry. Not all the people of Erelon, but like...
But you must be Aeonic to use it.
And this is kind of wildly different than our other Cosmere planets that we have seen. And we've only seen a single book, the first book, that Brandon had published in the Cosmere. So as we start to explore these things, I want to kind of lead with the fact that there's going to be more in the series that we'll just call Elantris right now.
Sure.
And we'll discover more. But I also want to hedge and just kind of warn people that things that you may have read in Elantris 10 years ago might be slightly different today, because there was a little bit of correction that Brandon did.
Just a couple years ago, he released a new version of Elantris because, as you said, it was one of the first books he put out, and there ended up actually being a couple of sort of technical errors in the magic system and how it does relate to the landscape, and he realized that the way that he had drawn the map of Erelon didn't actually match up with how he was drawing the Aeons. And
it has to, because...
It has to,
exactly. Because of the way the magic system works. So, I just remember, I read Elantris pretty early on. I think I went The Emperor's Soul and then Elantris. And it was confusing, especially without this kind of additional information. I think that the book itself is not the strongest in the Cosmere. I think anybody kind of looking at things objectively would agree. But I think that the way the magic system works is really important and is becoming more important as the story gets more developed. It's just that at the time, Brandon didn't quite have the full picture, didn't nail the execution.
I don't know. I mean, I do think at the moment it feels weaker, but I think that as we keep going through the Cosmere, we're going to notice that we actually have a lot of really valuable information in Elantris and the related books. It plants a lot of seeds, I think. Like, that's one of the first places we see a shard pool, especially a very, like, well-defined shard pool. And then let's go ahead and just get into the magic system so we can make some more parallels. So with Aeon Door, as we mentioned, not everyone is able to access it. And the people who are described as being taken by the Shroud. I guess I'm going to pronounce it that way. The Shayad.
The Shayad is how I've heard it pronounced before.
Yeah, I think that's actually the correct pronunciation.
It's cool. We make it all up here on Cosmere Conversations.
And I don't think there's not any kind of like physical event that happens with that, right? They just wake up one day and they've been taken by the Shayad. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think there's no physical presence that comes to take them. There is no like physical presence of the Shayad, but the physical appearance of the person that is taken is going to change. In the good times, when it's just the Shayad, the person that is taken becomes an Elantrian with the like white body. I always kind of imagine as like angelic type of boost, glowing a little bit.
Like glowing.
You know, halo at the top, wings, whatever. No, not real. But in the story of Elantris, of course, we are not dealing with happy fun times. Instead, we have the Riyadh.
Yeah, Rayad.
Okay, and that's basically the bad version, the corrupted version of the Shayad, that instead of turning you into a beautiful, angelic-like character, you become kind of a deathly...
They're almost like walking corpses, sort of. They're just kind of gray and drab, and everything hurts, right? But, so when this event happens to them, that grants them the ability to access the door. So they become able to do magic. And I don't know if that is predetermined by their spiritual DNA, that those people are always taken by the Shaod, or if it's actually the process of the Shaod that modifies their spiritual DNA in some way. But it does seem different than we see investiture working on other planets.
Yeah, the one key aspect that is missing in my mind when it comes to the Shaod is a form of breaking, of torture, of difficulty that is kind of like accessing the spirit web in some way.
You think it's like too random that it just
It
happens? Overnight?
does, at least right now, it does kind of seem to be random.
Yeah.
Whereas like on Rashar, we know that part of the reason that Knights Radiant are created is because they have been broken and the spirit web can be healed by the addition of a spren. With the Aeon, it does kind of seem to be... with the Shaod, it does kind of seem to be random. And that effect is also seen in the book where people, for seemingly no reason, are taken. They can be a poor person, they can be a old person, young person. Babies are taken by the Shaod, and of course the prince in Elantris is taken. That kind of jumpstarts the plot point there.
Yeah.
But let's look at the Aeon Door itself.
Yeah. So once they become Elantrians, which is what they call all these people who can do magic, they move to the sort of inner city of Elantris. They are able to draw these shapes, aeons, in the air, and it does require some kind of intent that they're actually trying to access the door. They can't just, wave their finger in the air. And each aeon corresponds to almost like an essence on Rashar, something specific. So I know like they can draw a specific aeon that means transportation and add some sort of diacritical modifying marks onto that character as they're drawing it in the air, and that will sort of encode where they're going to travel and allows them to teleport.
And when everything was going well, this magic system could be used to expand empires, to help
heal people, make food,
and kind of be used in ways similar to how we see investiture used on other planets. And then a corruption happens, and the corruption that happens...
There's an earthquake.
...is because of the physical change in the environment.
So it goes back to that physical connection. There's an earthquake which creates a different landscape, and because all of their characters, all of the aeons are based on the landscape, they then have to adjust and make a new line in their characters to account for that fault line that has manifested after the earthquake.
So in this magic system, when we say corruption, we actually don't mean the corruption of odium or trell.
Right.
We mean that because of the way the magic system is tied with the physical environment, a corruption was entered into the magic system when the physical environment changed.
Yeah.
And that breaks the Aeon Door. It creates the Rayod, the darkness, instead of the light coming to take these people. But it doesn't actually change a person's ability to use the magic system.
Exactly. So I would assume that the Shaod or Rayod, both, whatever that event is changing their spiritual DNA. And that's why they can still access it. I also thought it was interesting that the Aeon Door is described as like energy that's accessing the physical realm in specific pulse lengths or frequencies. Just because I've been thinking about that idea of like pulses and frequencies a lot since we talked about that music theory that one Reddit user had. So that jumped out at me.
I think that that's definitely a significant thing that's going on. Described as certain pulse lengths and frequencies.
Yeah, and that those shapes are sort of what allow the appropriate wavelength to come through.
Let's talk about the Shan, because this is another magic system that's used on Cell, but it's used by a different group of people.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about who's using... Well, let's define what the Shan is.
Yeah, Shan is sort of another version of accessing the door on Cell, and it's practiced by a meditative martial arts style that seems to be focused on quick motions and somehow gaining power from those motions.
And it's used by the Jindu. Who are the Jindu?
Is it Jindu? Jindo.
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 The Jindo are another race of people on Cell. I believe they neighbor Arelon.
And I think that the martial arts style that they practice is accomplishing the same thing. Because remember what Brooke said about the Aeon door? It's literally being written normally with like the finger, right?
Yeah,
They
just
kind
with
of
your
they
finger.
reach out and just kind of draw like in the air the Aeon that they want. And the Jindu perform a martial arts move in the same way. They're doing the same thing. It's just that through culture and history, they've developed these different practices of accessing the magic.
Yeah, it's kind of like a pencil sketch versus painting, right? It's sort of this in the same vein, just in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we only see this happening really once, but it seems as though Shan could be granting the user both incredible strength as well as some kind of incredible proprioception or the ability to see without having your eyes open is what we see in Elantris.
Spider sense is what's going on here.
Daredevil.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, basically, yeah. There is an extra sense of warning, of foresight, the tingling sensation that the Spider-Man gets before a bad guy shoots at him. That's what's going on with the Jindu.
One of the unique aspects of magic on Cell is that the power weakens the farther away you get from the land that it's based on. So, like an Aeonic person who's practicing Aeon Door, if they travel too far away from Arelon, they're not able to use their magic anymore. With Shan, I think because the Jindo, I forget what their country's name is, but because they're close enough to their home country, they're still able to access it in Arelon, as we see. But I think that's another interesting and unique part of magic on Cell, is that it is able to sort of be taken away based on your location.
And one of the kind of just interesting, obviously not super significant aspects to mention, but the planet of Cell is very large compared to the other planets of the Cosmere. There's a standard that is given, just the Cosmere standard.
It's based on Scadrial.
Yes,
Scadrial
so
is considered ground zero standard.
Yeah, so Cell is about 1.5 times bigger than Scadrial. And gravity is heavier as well, but the planet is significantly larger with significantly more diversity in its landforms than we see anywhere else. So one of the interesting things to note, while the Jindu and the Arelons are neighbors, there's other empires that exist in Cell that we had very little interaction with in the book, but they definitely kind of exist in their own little pocket of this gigantic world, and they're basically just hanging out by themselves. Their planet's so big that they haven't had the point yet of coming into like full contact, World War I type of style.
Yeah, there's a lot that we don't see connections. We do have the Fjordell Empire, who in Elantris we see is gaining ground and starting to interact with a lot more of its neighboring countries. And in the Fjordell Empire, you have this group of monks called the
And the Dakor are kind of presented as a, not necessarily, I don't want to say dark, but they kind of are presented as the antagonists.
Yeah, they're very intense, extremist.
There you go. Nice. I like it. Because the magic system of the Dakor uses bones.
Yeah, it's actually the physical bodies of the practitioners. So it reminds me a lot of hemalurgy in the fact that you're actually changing your physical body to get the magic. And this is something that's sort of revealed at the end of Elantris. Yeah. But these Dakor monks, their bones inside of their body are somehow twisted and deformed into characters of the Fjordell alphabet. Creepy.
And that, yeah, absolutely. And that's what is kind of granting them their power. Instead of writing on the wall or in the air, their power is still derived from a kind of physical change in the environment, but for them, it's inside their bones. And this grants them many of the magical abilities like strength, speed, teleportation, even though that is like a...
advanced.
Yeah, exactly. It's not something that you can do easily. But the Dakor, the Cheshan, and the Aeon Dor all have these kind of similarities of writing a language and creating that connection between the physical realm and the cognitive realm where the source of devotion and dominion, though shattered, still resides.
Mm-hmm. I also want to mention that, like you were saying, teleportation is a more advanced thing to do, and in Elantris we see that it may actually also require someone's death. They kind of like use the
cost,
the
sacrifice.
life energy of that person to like fuel their magic.
Yeah.
Ugh.
And hence the
so again,
kind of darkness.
like hemalurgy.
Yeah, exactly.
Where it's definitely an end negative, it seems.
And do we see the in positive, in negative, in neutral in these three magic systems?
I
I'm
don't know if we know
quite.
enough.
Yeah, I'm going to say not quite. But there definitely is an in negative when it comes to the Dakor, I feel like. And then with the Aeon Dor and the Cheshan, I kind of see how they could be, but I'm not 100% convinced yet. I want more in the world to be explored.
Definitely.
For example, in The Emperor's Soul, you mention incredibly significant magic system in an incredibly small package. Highly recommend if you're just a random person. Hey, I want a book to read, but I don't know anything. Just say, try out The Emperor's Soul. It's short. It gets the point across about like what Brandon does. Mm-hmm. It's the thing I recommend to total noobs. And that magic system that exists on the same planet, but in a vastly different empire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's fairly far removed from the section of Cell that we see in Elantris. And it's called the Rose Empire is where the Emperor's Soul takes place. And they have a system of magic called forgery, which involves a stamp being created, carved, and then stamped on either an object or a person, and that stamp essentially rewrites the history or the identity of that thing or that person.
So I absolutely loved this magic system, and to be fair, I have not reread The Emperor's Soul ever. And so,
really?
Yeah, it's been like 10 years.
You didn't read it in Arcanum Unbounded?
No, I didn't.
Dang.
Yeah, I skipped over that to move on to
I reread it, and I thoroughly enjoyed my reread.
I need to, because the magic system with forgery has so many significant connections.
I feel like it really gets at the heart of magic on Cell, and magic and the whole Cosmere.
Because let's kind of talk this out.
Yeah.
A stamp is created. Mm-hmm. When that stamp is applied to a person or an object, it rewrites their history, right? and kind of gives them...
essentially.
And the thing that I feel is most important to the larger Cosmere is that objects, or people, but let's take objects because it's a little easier, have their own history. They have their own desires, memory. Mm-hmm. They want to be certain things. A table wants to be a table. A table likes being a table. A table feels proud that it is a table. Mm-hmm. And it's, it's like, yes, I am here every day and people use me and I am functional but then the stamp comes along and says, yeah, you are a table. That's cool. But you used to be wood. You used to be a tree. You used to be life. And we can adjust or kind of change what you are by using this magic of forgery that would then suit the purpose of the forger.
Yeah, I think
expand on that.
A good example is when Shai, the main character of Emperor's Soul, changes the table in her room, and she just makes a very small, sort of elegant change in that this table it's old, it's fallen into disrepair, it hasn't been cared for over the years, so it's not very nice, and she wants a nice table. So she creates a stamp that rewrites the history of the table so that the table was cared for. And I think that does fall in line with what the table wants, because the idea is the table can remember a time that it was beautiful, it was cared for, and so she kind of just gives it a little extra push. And suddenly that table is transformed into a beautiful, well-polished, well-maintained piece of furniture.
Super small, but when we're looking at the larger Cosmere, we know that there are so many different aspects of objects having a sentience, or of ideas gaining a sentience. In Rashar, we see that.
The idea of identity of inanimate objects and the way that we think about objects and then the way that objects think about themselves is important.
It's best to think of the history or the function of these inanimate objects kind of similar to a computer code. That's how Brandon describes it. You have a function, a string of text, and by making small changes to that string of text, you can get a new output from the function that you started with.
Which I think is an interesting comparison when we're talking about spiritual DNA also, because a lot of times DNA itself is discussed as being similar to a computer code in that same way.
Absolutely. So really what we should see a soul stamp as is kind of a form of hacking the spiritual DNA. Yep. And you said that last week, and I really liked that idea involving hemalurgy as like a form of hacking. Well, this is another form of hacking that spiritual DNA. Say, okay, table, your spiritual DNA says that you had a shitty history and you got beat up and not cared for, but we're going to hack in, give you this soul stamp, and the new output is going to be a beautiful table.
Yeah, I think similar to what we said last week, though, hemalurgy is that hack that permanently alters your spiritual DNA. Whereas, like, on Scadrial, they have that technology that sort of does it in a less permanent way. I feel like a soul stamp is similar because they do wear off depending on the materials you use and how long it's there. So it is sort of that same idea of, like, a temporary overlay that modifies the spiritual DNA.
Well, and don't we also have some information that forgery is being used by certain groups on Cell to form a type of technology? Or is that on Nalthis?
No, that's Nalthis. That's Nalthis.
Okay, I'm going to delete that. Now, while there are several different aspects of forgery that we could dive into and kind of talk about the materials that are used, the only one that I really want to call out and bring attention to, just because you mentioned hemalurgy, is blood sealing.
Yeah.
Which is used by a group of people on Cell called the Duzhamar. Not going to pretend that that's a good pronunciation.
Yeah. It's a hard word.
It's a weird spelling. It's got DZ. So if you tell me how to pronounce that, I will go with
DZH.
Yeah. Solid. DZH Amar is what we got. And they are using forgery, but having human blood be the ink that the stamps are dipped into. And the stamps themselves are made out of bone. So kind of hinting at that same aspect of the Dakur, the kind of twisting of bone, the use of bone as a stamp, the blood usage. I don't know. I feel like anytime we get bloody, it's probably not good.
Right.
There's probably like some things going on that shouldn't be going on. But
well, and it's similar. We're going to see this idea in just a moment when we go to Nalthis as well, but the idea of organic materials being more powerful than synthetic. And that's true for regular forgery as well. Organic materials tend to make better stamps, and the Dizhamar take it sort of one step further, go all the way, and use human organic things.
And one of the benefits of tapping into this kind of like very powerful but maybe a little creepy magic is that they can do things like create animated skeletons that can be given tasks, not necessarily going to be like the drabs or the lifeless that can like fight in a war.
No, I think they are pretty similar to lifeless.
But they're skeletons.
Yes,
So
correct.
if I like punch one, do they fall over?
I don't know.
Because if I punch a skeleton, there's nothing to hold it together.
I think they have to be kind of strong because people are pretty afraid of them. And,
okay.
like, they are able to harm other people. So I would say they're not easily defeated.
Okay.
Obviously, they're not your most brilliant soldier.
I thought that they were primarily used for things like tracking another person, being given a kind of simple, basic task. But you think they're closer to like a lifeless soldier than necessarily like an animated towel.
I think it's one of those things that has a lot of power that we haven't necessarily seen used yet, and it's something that people who are outsiders to blood sealing know, like, hey, if you wanted to, you could make an army of skeletals and it would be awful, and they've simply chosen not to. They've chosen to use them for more inconspicuous things.
So with all of these magic systems on Cell, the key thing to keep in mind is that there is a connection going on between the spiritual realm, the cognitive realm, and the physical realm. With the Aeon Door and the other magic systems we talked about, it's more about linking just the cognitive and allowing some of that power to come out of the cognitive by drawing the little stuff.
Mm-hmm.
With the forgery, it's more connection about getting to the spiritual realm, the object's soul.
Because they're even called soul stamps.
Yes. And asking, like, what's the essence of this object? What's the history of this object? And how is it connected to everything around it? I'm going to make a couple of changes to help me in this instance or to make my life, more beautiful. Mm-hmm. I think that the key thing that we see on Cell is a couple of magic systems that are all about connecting the different realms and bringing them closer together. Mm. And so that's what I want to leave us with for Cell as we transition to Nalthis.
Yeah, great. Let's go to Nalthis. On Nalthis, we have investiture coming from the shard Endowment. And Endowment is actually alive.
One of the few.
Yeah.
I mean, we get to talk about a real shard.
It's not shattered. We don't know anything about it, but it's there. It's not dead.
So we have Endowment on the planet of Nalthis, and Endowment is going to manifest on the planet in a way that is, once again, different from anything that we've seen anywhere else in the Cosmere. It seems, this is my kind of guess about what's going on, Endowment gave up a little bit of her power, its power. I don't even know if we know the best.
Yeah, we know that it is a woman.
Okay, so it's a woman, but we don't know any details about her.
Correct.
So I think that some power was given up by the Shard of Endowment to give breath to all of the humans of Nalthis.
Yeah, very likely.
Do you want to describe what is breath? Capital B breath.
Sure. So the full name is biochromatic breath, and that's important. It's essentially the power of life, the power to create life. So as you mentioned, we have a unique situation here where humans on Nalthis have extra investiture.
Mm-hmm.
All humans everywhere have a sort of base level of investiture regardless, and that's sort of just the identity of their soul. If you have a soul, you have a tiny bit of investiture. However, innately on Nalthis, humans are born with extra investiture in the form of this breath, which is, kind of an indescribable, just like unit of power, I guess is the best way to describe it.
I want to kind of use a couple of basic things that every human's going to experience and maybe just kind of give a hint at how that would be different if you were a human on Nalthis who had one breath. I think that everybody gets sick. Everybody has good days and bad days. Mm-hmm. Everybody has the ability to kind of experience their world, the major senses, all that stuff you got going on, okay? We have those things. A person who has a breath, a human on Nalthis with no changes, I think is going to have a more...
Just a tiny bit more full experience?
I'm going to say vibrant.
Ooh,
their experience is a tiny
word.
bit more vibrant. They get sick a little less often. They're a little bit mentally healthier. They're a little bit more...
resilient.
Yes, resilient to life's down. And maybe, just a little bit, their senses are above average. We're not talking about superhuman yet. That comes in a moment. We're just talking about standard Nalthis human seems to be, because of breath, a little bit better, a little bit more vibrant than all the other humans that we see in the rest of the Cosmere.
I love that description because we'll see biochromatic breath has to do with color, so that idea of them having this sort of innate ability to live more vibrantly really, really ties in with that magic system. Well done.
Thank you. It's almost as if I thought about this beforehand.
So breaths can be shared or taken, or just like any other physical possession, you're able to either transfer it to another person, someone can take the breath from you, so you can build them up.
Well, let's just be clear, because a breath does have to be willingly given up.
Oh, good call.
It does not, it cannot be, it can be added to a person, but it has to be willingly given up, because it is connected to a person's spiritual DNA. It is your breath. Brooke, you have one breath, and it is yours, connected to your spiritual DNA. I cannot come by and pickpocket your breath.
Good point.
But
I was wrong.
It was totally fine, because it's just a small clarification. Just what you're saying happens, but it has to happen voluntarily. Mm-hmm. I cannot come by and pickpocket your breath, but I could say, this would be a bad thing. This is a bad example, okay? If you have a boyfriend or a lover who does this, run away. But I could say, sweetie, if you loved me, you would give me your breath. And if you gave that up willingly, even if I kind of manipulated you into doing it, that can happen, but I can't steal it from you.
True.
With the breath, a person is able to perform magic if they have acquired a larger than normal number of breaths. So everybody gets one, but if you have a bunch, you can do magic.
I mean, I think you can do it with one, but you would only be able to do one magic trick, and then your life would decrease in quality. So, not the best idea.
However, I do find that idea interesting, that anybody can do magic if they know about it.
Right.
But certain people are going to be better at doing magic than others. So
it does still take skill.
Let's talk about the kind of different ways that breaths are used, and then we'll talk about the people who use breaths on Nalthis. Okay? So, biochromatic breath. There are 10 different levels that are called Heightenings on Nalthis. Think of these as like power-up levels. You get more abilities, you have more breath to use and do more magic, and you are living a more vibrant life each time you level up.
Yeah, as we were saying earlier, your senses are being heightened.
Absolutely. And these heightenings are going to be 100% based on the number of breaths you have. Let's go down the list. Heightening number 1, to be considered a bare minimum magic user in the planet Nalthis, on the planet Nalthis. You must have 50 breaths to reach the first heightening. Brooke, what's the effect, the ability that is gained just by having 50 breaths?
When you have 50 breaths, you are granted aura recognition, which basically means you're able to sense life around you. So without looking, you're able to sort of feel, hey, there's somebody behind me. There are 3 people in this building next to me.
And is it all life, including animals, or is it just humans?
I believe it is also animals.
I think
it's sort of strongest with humans.
Yes.
But then you're also able to feel animals, but animals feel smaller.
Yes.
Because their sort of life sense is smaller. I want to say it's the same with plants too, but don't quote me on that.
Okay. The idea of being able to recognize someone's aura is going to become more important as you go up the levels in heightenings as well. But if you have the first heightening at 50 breaths, you have aura recognition, and you can use those 50 breaths to do magic. We'll talk about what type of magic can be performed after we get through all the heightenings.
Yeah.
So,
second heightening goes up quite a bit to 200 breaths needed to reach the second heightening.
And the ability that is gained from the second heightening is perfect pitch and the recognition of perfect pitch. So this is always key to keep an eye out for. If a character, for example, Hoyd, is described as having perfect pitch, which I do not have, but that's a key to understanding that, he has 200 breaths and has achieved the second heightening.
Yeah. The third heightening goes up then to 600 breaths, which grants you perfect color recognition. Great for artists.
The fourth heightening requires 1,000 breaths and gives perfect life recognition.
Ooh, so do we think, is that sort of the culmination of aura recognition?
I believe it is, because I think that there is kind of a difference between the aura of someone and their soul. Or, for example, I think that someone who had the first heightening could easily tell the difference between a drab, a normie, a normal person on Nalthis, and a person with the first heightening or the 10th heightening. Easily tell the difference between all of those. But I think a person with the fourth heightening
would know exactly who you are.
Yes, I think that they would have more ability to basically access someone's spiritual DNA. to kind of... I think that's what's going on the Cosmere level, is that it's giving you more of an ability to recognize someone's spiritual DNA. So, for example, I'm going to have to double check the moment with Lightsong and Hoyd, but like I feel like people with the fourth heightening or above should be able to kind of clearly recognize that something weird is going on with Hoyd more than normal.
Yeah.
That's what I kind of see from perfect life recognition, is some kind of access to the spirit DNA.
Interesting.
Let's go to the next one.
5th heightening requires 2,000 breaths, but it grants you agelessness.
And this is the heightening automatically that the returned are going to achieve with their one divine breath. Yeah. We'll talk more about returned in a moment. 6th heightening requires 3,500 breaths, and it gives you what is called instinctive awakening.
Basically, it just makes it way easier for you to do magic. You can like do magic perfectly.
I would just say that, hint, hint, descendants of the royal family have instinctive awakening to a lesser degree than someone who had the 6th heightening, but more than a normal person. So the main characters in Warbreaker are Vivenna and Ciri, and both of them have more of an instinctive awakening ability. They're better at doing magic than normal people because they are descendants of the royal family.
Good call. 7th heightening goes up to 5,000 breaths. So many. And that gives you invested breath recognition.
And that's the ability to tell exactly how many breaths other people have? Is that what it is?
I would guess so.
Yeah. Number 8, 10,000 breaths. And remember, we're talking about like a person's kind of soul. Extension of the soul. Soul plus.
Their life force.
There you go. Life force. The 8th heightening gives the ability of command breaking. Now again, we'll talk more about the way that magic is done, but basically a command is given by a magician to an object, and with the 8th heightening, another magician can come in and break the command of the first magician.
They can undo your magic.
Exactly. Let's go on to the next one.
The 9th heightening requires 20,000 breaths, and it gives you greater awakening, so even better magic, as well as audible commands and color distortion.
So when it says color distortion, it literally means that light, and therefore color, bends around you.
Yeah.
You have, everybody who is going to have increased number of breaths does appear more vibrant. Their color is fuller and deeper, but a person who has the 9th heightening would literally start to distort light around them and color around them. And the only entity that we see at the level of the 9th heightening, at least in full force, is the God King. Yep. And he actually doesn't have the 9th heightening, he has the next one, but that effect of color distortion is seen whenever he walks or does anything.
Yeah. 10th heightening is 50,000 breaths or above, we assume.
Yes.
And it grants perfect invocation, which again just makes your magic more powerful. And honestly, we don't know what else. Some other cool stuff.
Obviously, everything below you get as well. These are stacking powers. And again, the God King is the only person we see in kind of full force with all 10th heightening. But we also know that there are other beings that have held that much breath, specifically Vasher. Vasher is going to be one of the 5 scholars, and we assume that at a certain point he held the entire royal treasure. Is that what they call it? Like the number of breaths?
The breaths that the God King currently possesses is the gift of Vasher originally. He had all of those and he gave them to be passed down from God King to God King.
Yeah, and one of the interesting aspects of magic on Nalthis is that it's not limited just to the Heightenings, because we also have the Returned, and they kind of get their own little special abilities as well, in addition to having a bunch of breaths.
Yeah, they have their own separate restrictions and abilities.
So let's talk specifically for a moment about the process of using this magic system in what is called awakening. So tell us how awakening works. You have these breaths, maybe a different number, you've reached your different heightening. What can you do with the breaths?
Yeah, awakening allows you to animate objects with biochromatic breath. So the breath is sort of the vehicle, and the fuel for this transformation process is color. So you need to be in physical contact with something of color, and then you also touch the object that you want to awaken. As we previously mentioned, organic material is easier, as well as anything closer to a human form is easier to awaken. And then you infuse your breath into that object. You have to give it a command, so something to do, and then visualize what you want it to do, as well as say it out loud. And that object will come to life and do the thing that you've told it to do. And then the color thing that you are using is bleached of its color.
And so awakening is a powerful magical tool that relies heavily on knowledge in order to unlock all of its uses. It is not a magic system for noobs.
It's not something you can just pick up and do.
Yeah, and I think even the Vena, who, as I said, has a little bit extra ability when it comes to awakening, really struggles until she starts getting some information from her friends / captors, and eventually from Vasher himself, because there's so much specific things that must be done in an awakening to make it work correctly. And if you make one small mistake,
it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It's not like Kaladin, who could just run down into the
he did things
the chasms
instinctively.
Yeah, and he just kind of figured shit out. Like, he just walked up to a wall and started painting his hand on it, and it stuck, he could stick rocks to it, and then he climbed up higher and higher. Cool, nice work. But what an awakener has to do is give a specific command, be touching something with color, be touching the object that they want, have the intent in their mind, and then kind of shift the power, take the power from one object through themselves into the secondary object, and that command that is given has to be very precise.
Yeah, they have to know exactly what they want that command to be, and there are, obviously different effects of simpler commands versus more complicated commands. More complicated commands will use more breath, but also are obviously more useful. So, for example, a more vague command such as grab things is less effective, but also uses less breath, versus something like, upon call, become my fingertips and grip that which I must, which is a command that we hear in Warbreaker. Pretty complicated.
Taking a lot of breath.
Yes, uses a lot of breath, and this concept is seen most notably in Nightblood. This complication of the object needing to understand what you mean when you say something as complicated as, upon call, become my fingers and grip that which I must.
Because there is... Nightblood is obviously one of these objects that has been awakened. We've talked about this before in, I believe, episode 5, 17 Shard and the World Hoppers. Nightblood is awakened with 10,000 breaths, Maybe 1,000? No, 10,000.
It's a lot. I want to say almost 100,000.
Okay. It's a lot. I think it's 10,000. Could be. There's zeros in there that we might be missing.
Yeah.
But he's awakened with a bunch of breath and given a simple command. Destroy evil. Oops, we forgot to tell the sentient sword what evil was, so he just wants to destroy things. He thinks all things are evil. He doesn't understand or have any type of connection to the morality of the people that are holding it or anything like that. He just wants to destroy evil. So they made a mistake with Nightblood, and now they have this sentient sword that's running around. Now Rashar as the end of Words of Radiance.
But that idea of like needing to be very careful and specific with your commands is an essential part of this magic system.
Now, one of the connections back to Cell is this idea of the object you are trying to awaken, one being organic, that's more helpful, and two being in the form as close as possible to a human being.
Yeah.
For example, a jacket would be easier to awaken and take less breaths than just a piece of cloth.
Correct.
Even if you were a seamstress and you could turn that cloth into a jacket, doesn't matter. If it's already in the form closer to a form of a human being, it's going to be easier to awaken. And I think that is because what's happening on the big picture of the Cosmere is that the Awakener is connecting the object to their spiritual DNA. And so the closer the object is to the form of a human being, the easier it is.
Interesting. Are you thinking like how our DNA biologically is like closer to that of other humans or like closer to that of other primates? Are you thinking like that's the same kind of thing on a spiritual level?
I do think it's that, yeah.
Trick it into being slightly more human, it's slightly closer to you already?
Yes. I think that like what is going on is that you have cognitive realm, that's intent, that's the command. Mm-hmm. You have the physical realm, the person that's like conducting this stuff. And then you have the spiritual realm.
Physical realm would be like your color source as well.
Well, you have all the things. You have the object, you have the physical person, but you have the human that's like the conductor. And you have the spiritual realm where the power source is coming from, because now we're on Nalthis, so shard is in the spiritual realm. And you're kind of tricking the inanimate object, or convincing the inanimate object that, no, you're not a towel, you're not a blanket. You are my fingertips that will grab things as I must.
Interesting.
And so you're imprinting your spiritual DNA on the object using
a little bit,
Yeah, that's what I think's going on.
Interesting.
Big picture stuff.
Yeah.
So we have a word of Brandon that I think is pretty interesting about how in the future we might see Awakenings play out on Warbreaker, because it ends with a pretty big cliffhanger.
Oh, the biggest cliffhanger.
And it's been like a decade now since Warbreaker.
Cannot wait until the sequel.
And we don't know exactly when that's going to be. I don't think it's 2019.
It's pretty far down the line.
I'm thinking like 2020. You might see some information about Warbreaker. So don't get your hopes up, but go back and read some Warbreaker if you need some Warbreaker love. What did Brandon say about what might be going on in the future?
Yeah, he said that there is a country on Nalthis that uses breath to create like awakened machines.
Awakened machines?
Yeah, someone asked him if there were like awakened cogs and like pieces of machinery, and he said yes, that there was a country that was already using that investiture to create technology.
And so, once again, we've seen this now in each of our episodes on magic. There is magic, but what we see more and more is that magic being used to produce technology that is not limited to anyone based on race or spiritual DNA.
Yeah, it's like the democratization
Yes.
of investiture. Oh my gosh, I like that.
I like how you said it, and then immediately we're like, I need to save that in my brain. Pinterest, right there into my head.
Everyone remember that phrase. I coined it.
Because that's definitely what's going on. We're having a democratization of investiture. What we see in the book Warbreaker is not that machines are being created. They're still playing on the lame level, the like level 1 of... They're like, what we're going to do is we're going to take a dead body and we are going to awaken it with a bunch of breaths. They call these the lifeless, and they are normally used as soldiers, guards, slaves, hard labor. Why use a living person when you can just take a dead body, awaken it, and make it do basically whatever you want.
Yeah.
I mean, some limits on commands and whatnot. But, for example, Claude is the awakened that is held by the gang in Warbreaker, and Claude sometimes just gets their groceries. Like, that was his job for the day. Claude, go down to the market and buy us our groceries. Cool, Claude. Or just carry stuff. Not even buy, go by yourself, but just like, you are going to be my shopping cart. Yep. I will just hang things from you, Claude. But
I thought it was interesting that the lifeless also retain some kind of memory or concept of who they are, even as a lifeless, where we see, like, if a person was a soldier in life and they are reawakened through this process, they will be a more skilled lifeless soldier than if you were to awaken, like, a farmer and then say, hey, lifeless farmer, be a soldier now.
Yeah, because the lifeless army is a key part of the plot of Warbreaker. There are, I think, 50,000 soldiers that are held by the God King, but controlled by members of the royal court, the Returned. And this is the army that is supposed to protect the city in events of anything going bad. And that lifeless army is stolen, is corrupted, and is going to be misused at the end of Warbreaker. Leaving us on a gigantic cliffhanger is when Vasher sweeps in and is like, oh, yeah, I totally left my stone army with you guys. You can send that after the lifeless. And then the book ends. So it's just like stone army versus lifeless army, and the book is now over.
Yeah.
And wait a decade or more to get your sequel. To be fair, he's written other things. He's not pulling a Pat Rothfuss. No disrespect.
Oh, gosh. Should we talk about the Returned a little bit more?
Absolutely. Let's talk about them.
So we have the lifeless, who are dead humans animated through a normal awakening process. Then we have the Returned, who are humans who die and are brought back to life, apparently through the shard directly, Endowment, who gives them a piece of her power, which they call the divine breath, automatically moving that person to the 5th heightening, as we said before. And the Returned are, like, fully living, whereas the lifeless are not really alive. They just kind of move around.
They're connected. The lifeless are connected directly to their awakened breath, where the Returned are their own entity.
They're their own people. Yeah, totally.
They just have one of these divine breaths. Vasher, actually, who, remember, is much, much older than all these characters. Zahel on Rashad. Vasher refers to Returned as Type 1 biochromatic entities.
And remember, Vasher was part of the 5 Scholars, so they have this whole, very scientific categorization of all of the ways that they can use magic, and a lot of this knowledge has gotten lost on Nalthis so far, but that's where that very scientific title is coming from.
Well, that's only half of the scientific title. The other, they are Type 1 biochromatic entities. Ahem. Spontaneous sentient biochromatic manifestations in a deceased host is the full title given by Vasher about the Returned. So, I know I said it in a silly way, but they are spontaneous sentience biochromatic manifestations in a deceased host. The body is dead, but it is brought back spontaneously by being given a divine breath, which is a splinter of endowment.
Yeah. I know, pretty impressive.
When you are returned, there is normally a reason that a person was returned. And
that's what the lore is
yes.
on the land, anyway. We don't know a lot about the reality of the returned.
That's true, but I do think that there is a reason. It's just not maybe necessarily connected to what the people observe.
Oh, sure.
I think there's endowment reason.
Yeah.
For example, I do think that the main returned that we see in Warbreaker is Lightsong. Lightsong the Bold, Lightsong the Brave. He died in a very heroic manner. If I remember correctly, he was on a sailboat, but he was on a boat.
He saves his niece from drowning.
Exactly. He was on a boat. He was not a sailor. He was like an accountant or something. But he's traveling on a boat with his brother. Yeah?
I don't remember if his brother was even there or if it was just him and his niece. But the important thing to know is that he saves his niece. And
he saves his niece in this
dies.
heroic manner. And then he comes back as a returned. And part of coming back as a returned is you manifest as a being that looks and appears the way in which the person envisions that they should look or appear. So Lightsong dies in this heroic manner, saving his niece. He is returned as Lightsong the Bold, Lightsong the Brave, as a godlike warrior figure. I mean, he's 7 feet tall. All the returned are taller than normal. But he, cut like a Adonis type character. Super strong, super beautiful. He's like prime Brad Pitt, but 7 foot tall. Just like got it all going on. He wasn't that way in life. It's not just like they die and then just become slightly larger and they glow more. It's that they manifest in a different way. They manifest in the way that they themselves or even the people around them expect them to look.
Yeah, it's like an idealized physicality. And they are able to change their physical appearance, actually. But I think that's a piece of information that is kind of lost to them. They don't actually know that they have that power. Yeah,
and actually, none of them do. Even the God King doesn't know that he can change his appearance. And Vasher remarks on it at the end of the story as like, I thought you all would figure it out. You have the evidence of the ability to change your appearance staring you in the face with Ciri and Vivenna,
right,
who have the royal locks and the royal lineage, which gives them the ability to at will change their hair color. It's a small change, and it's the only thing that's kind of left over, but they are the descendants of divine return beings of some type. Mm-hmm. And Vasher, we know, can change his entire appearance.
Yeah.
To go from the godlike 7 foot tall Adonis character down to his normal human size. He could even become a woman. There's no restriction that I am aware of on the appearance changing. And I've sometimes wondered if Hoyd had
like a similar
a similar ability or power about changing appearance, but his is more described more like disguises than necessarily full appearance changing. Yeah. So I've kind of jumped back and forth between that idea.
We should say that although they do have a lot of perks being returned, they have a caveat, which is that they're born with this divine breath, but in order to remain alive, they need to consume a breath once a week at least.
And if they do not, their breath will always be consumed after 7 days. So they can get an additional breath during the week, and at the end of the week, that one breath will be consumed, and they are back down to their single divine breath and fifth heightening. And so that's what most often happens to return. This is just mentioned like once by, I think it's Bluefingers. He just says, most returned are going to die after 7 days. They're going to return, and it will happen like out in the village somewhere, too far away to get them a breath or anything like that, or just out in the country. They don't make it to the capital city and get all the rewards and perks of like living a life of luxury. Instead, it's just like it happens, and 7 days later, the divine breath is consumed, and the person dies all over again.
That's sort of interesting. It's almost like endowment is taking these people who maybe have a purpose to accomplish, saying, hey, I'm going to send you back, but you have 7 days to like accomplish this purpose, is maybe the original intent. And then humans have hacked it, right?
Yes.
And perpetuated and kept these people alive, often with no purpose at all, and really twisted this original intent. Possibly. That's a theory.
Because now all the returned, if they make it to the big capital city, which is like where culture dictates that they go, they live a life of luxury. They are treated as
the
gods.
Court of the gods.
Yes,
yeah.
as the kind of the Greek gods. We can imagine, they live up on Mount Olympus, and the humans come every so often to offer sacrifices and ask for aid, and that's exactly what the return do on Nalthis. I find the return so very interesting, but they do need to consume additional breaths each week, or one breath each week. Mm-hmm. If they do not, their divine breath will be taken and consumed, and they will die. Mm-hmm. So there's this entire culture and society set up around people willingly sacrificing their own breath
so that the returned can continue living.
Exactly. And this creates depression in some of the gods. It creates conflict. It creates vanity in manifestations of power and kind of corruption in other of the gods, because these people are sacrificing a life force so that they can live. And when a person gives up their breath and they have no more, they become what is called a drab. And I often compare or see drab as like the opposite of a return. Like return, you get all this superpower, extra benefits, totally awesome. Drab, you're drained of your life force. You become less vibrant. We know that maybe the humans' version or perspective about what the return should be might not line up with endowment's belief, but when everything lines up perfectly, you have the kind of crescendo moment of Lightsong's character at the end of Warbreaker, when it appears what happened with Lightsong is that his own perspective of like, why am I returned? Why was I selected? Why did I come back when no one else did? The belief of the people around him who were like, you're a god, you're super important, you're going to do something great. And endowment, who gave up part of herself, a splinter, to give this divine breath to Lightsong. All of those realities came to a perfect moment. And that exists at the end of the book.
Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking like the philosophical implications of everything you just said are so strong. Like that idea of like searching for your purpose. Why am I here? Like desiring to do something good, do something meaningful, but not really knowing what that is. And then that also being tied to your concept of identity and your memory. Because when they're returned or brought back, they have no memory of who they were in their previous life. And I think like if Lightsong had that information earlier, he may have actually been able to accomplish something.
Maybe something. I love this idea that things are happening to characters for reasons that they don't understand, but is going to be impactful down the road in some way. And so I think that when it came to Lightsong, he could not have had that climactic moment of saving the God King.
Yeah.
If everything had to line up in that one, and that's why I really do love, and I'm like getting excited talking about this moment. I love Lightsong's character. I love his story progression throughout Warbreaker. He's a secondary character, not, Ciri or Vivenna, but I really love his character arc in that story. I want to go back and read Warbreaker now, but I got to get through Oathbringer again.
I think the last thing we should mention about the Nalthian magic system is another manifestation of endowment, which comes in the form of a flower called the Tears of Edgley, which we talked about briefly, as Mraize has a flower which we suspect may be one of the Tears of Edgley. But on Nalthis, it is a flower that produces dyes for, mainly textiles, and it is highly, highly prized and sought after. It only grows in this specific jungle valley in Hallandren, and it has been the reason for war in a lot of cases because it's a big trading export. It's very important to their economy. But it's also this flower that produces dye, right, in a place where color is used as the fuel for magic.
I think that with the story of Warbreaker, one of the most difficult aspects when it comes to me recommending Warbreaker to other people for the first time is that Brandon takes a long time, 300 pages plus maybe, of developing this world where the economy and the politics are the most significant drivers of the plot. And it's boring as shit. I mean...
Really? I did not find that to be true.
I think that when you compare something like the first half, first half to first 2/3 of Warbreaker to a book like Oathbringer, it blows it out of the water. I mean,
that's not really a fair comparison.
Okay, even something like Mistborn...
I thought Elantris was slower than Warbreaker.
Let's just put it this way. I think that Brandon has got much, much better at creating interesting worlds and depth over time. Warbreaker, you can see what he was interested in. He wanted to talk about the economy. This is the Tears of Edgley is creating a monopoly for a single group of people.
Yeah.
And that's the impetus for conflict and war. And you have, imagine China in the ancient world, one of the only producers of silk for, Europeans or people from what we now call the Middle East, where you would have this kind of thing that's known about, but it's far away, and the only way to get it is to pay great deals of money, or eventually to start going to war with those people to take the valuable resource. So Brandon, that's a deep thing to explore. It's complex, and it's hard to explore. And I think that Brandon's gotten better at that over time. And I think that when you look at either Warbreaker or Elantris, what you have to keep in mind is it's his earlier writings, but it doesn't mean that the magic systems or what are going on those planets is less significant to the greater Cosmere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do we have any closing thoughts about either?
Nope, I just want to let everyone know to reach out to us on Reddit, Facebook, Twitter. Keep the conversation going. We love when you guys comment, message, tweet, and let us know your thoughts, any cool theories, what you think about the episode.
And the only other thing to keep in mind is that we will be doing our Oathbringer breakdown.
Oh, dang.
That is going to be, this is 10 episodes I love ending here. 10 episodes, you have all of kind of the background detail about the Cosmere.
Yeah, these are kind of our intro episodes.
And now we're going to look at Oathbringer, but we don't know the structure of it at the moment. We are going to take some time to kind of put things together. It's going to be heavily spoilerific. All spoilers.
Tons of spoilers, tons of theories.
Yeah, so
we're going to really get into it.
What I might do on both the Facebook/Reddit is throw up a what do you want to talk about when it comes to Oathbringer, because that's what we are going to be looking at next.
Cool.
So, Brooke, take us away.
Until next time, life before death.
Strength before weakness.
Journey before destination.